Once again, a very good afternoon, everyone. So it's really a pleasure to address this webinar on Zen Tax Talks 67. So today is the 67th week of continuous knowledge sharing. So this wouldn't be possible without the support and the feedback that you people give us. So thank you so much from the entire team of Zen Tax. If you want us to talk on any other topics or any topics that you want specifically to be addressed by us in the webinar, please do send us a mail, or you can contact us through WhatsApp, or you can ping us in any social media. We'll take up the topic and we'll address a webinar on that. So going on to the today's topic. So today we'll be discussing about the GST on healthcare services. So, healthcare services is very crucial, and it is very crucial for the doctors and the healthcare service providers on understanding the GST aspect. So, in a common parlance, it is generally understood that healthcare services are largely exempt, but we do have healthcare services which are taxable, and the sale of medicines which are taxable. So let us look into detail, like what are the healthcare services which are taxable and which are exempted, and by means of advanced rulings which help us understand these terminologies better. So whenever there is a supply in GST, the first thing we have to look into is whether there is levy on GST. So in GST, the charging section is section 9. So if we go on to the section 9, it specifically talks about the levy. So we have to see whether the supply of whatever the services provided by the healthcare professionals are covered under levy or not. So when we read into the section 9, it tells that the supply of all goods and services except alcoholic liquor for human consumption, it is chargeable to GST. So obviously the healthcare services are covered under this, and obviously that is a levy. So whenever there is GST is charged, then next thing that we'll have to see is the GST rate, and then we'll be going on to the exemption notification to see if it is exempted or not. So in case of healthcare services, the exemption, the major thing that is the all of the definitions of healthcare services, everything is provided in the exemption notification. That is the exemption notification 12/2017. So before going into the exemption notification, I thought I'll give you a summary about like how it was before the GST, that is in service tax. So generally, healthcare services is basically covered under this code of this service code. In GST, it is covered under 73, 74, 75, and 46 of notification 12/2017. So in the service tax also, it was exempt by means of 25/2012. So the major services are healthcare services by the clinical establishment, authorized medical practitioner, paramedics, the services by a veterinary clinic, the services provided by cord blood banks, and the services provided by biomedical waste treatment. So we'll be looking into detail about these aspects. So yeah, so as discussed earlier, the exemption notification is notification 12/2017. So in this 12/2017 notification, entry number 74 specifically talks about services by way of clinical establishment. So if you see this entry number 74, it specifically we have two points, that is A and B. Healthcare services by clinical establishment and authorized medical practitioner and the paramedics, and services provided by way of a transportation of a patient to or from the clinical establishment. So in this, first we have to understand what is healthcare services, and if the healthcare services is provided by a clinical establishment or an authorized medical practitioner or a paramedics, we have to understand these terminologies. So first, the definition of healthcare services is, as said earlier, it is defined in the notification 12/2017. So this is the definition of healthcare services. So this definition of healthcare services can be split into three parts. That is, it goes on to tell means that is what is all included in what is mean the healthcare service and what is included, that is inclusion, and what is excluded. So the first part will be healthcare services means. So it tells that healthcare services, that is services relating to diagnosis, treatment or care for illness, injury, deformity, abnormality or pregnancy in any recognized system of medicine in India. So it is in as we all know that any diagnosis or treatment will be coming under healthcare services. Say suppose if I'm suffering from fever and I'm going to a doctor for the treatment, or if I'm a diabetic and going for diabetic treatment, or if I have a blood pressure, if I'm going treatment to the doctor. So that is all will be covered under healthcare services. And even pregnancy, even though it is not a disease, it is also considered as a healthcare services because it is specifically healthcare services includes pregnancy. In this, if you see, there is a specific term in any recognized system of medicine in India. So first, for that, we have to know what is a recognized system of medicine in India. So, to know what is a recognized system of medicine in India, we'll have to go to the Clinical Establishment Act, which specifically tells about what are the recognized system of medicines. So, in that, allopathy, yoga, naturopathy, Ayurveda, homeopathy, Siddha, Unani, and any other system of medicine is also included. So suppose if my friend is a doctor and he's an Ayurvedic doctor providing Ayurvedic treatments, that is also covered under healthcare services. So to put it simple, the healthcare services, it includes what are the treatment that we get in normal in any recognized system of medicine in India, that will be considered as healthcare services. So going to the next part, we've seen what means healthcare. Next is what is included in healthcare services. So it includes the patient transportation to or from the clinical establishment. So there is a patient admitted in the hospital, and we are transporting him from his place to the clinical establishment by means of ambulance. That is considered as a healthcare services. So it specifically includes this patient transportation to or from the clinical establishment. Next comes the most important part, that is what is excluded from the healthcare services. So generally the exclusion talks about what is excluded from the definition. But in this definition of healthcare, in the exclusion itself, we'll have some exclusion as well. That is, I'll tell you in detail. So this excludes cosmetic or plastic surgery. So generally, cosmetic or plastic surgery is excluded from healthcare services, but unless and until it is done to restore the anatomy or function of the body, that will be considered as a healthcare services. Say, for an example, the treatment which is restorative in nature. So, if we see, newborns are sometimes born with a cleft lip. So, to make it normal, there be a surgery done to that. So, that is considered as restorative in nature, and that will be considered as healthcare services. Same way, if a person is attacked by means of an acid, or he's undergoing he met with an accident and he has to do the plastic surgery to make the body feel better. I mean, to make the body to do the normal functions. That is, if the plastic surgery is done only, the brain will work in an effective way, or it will work normally. So in that cases, that is considered as a healthcare services. And same way, certain newborns are born with a club foot, the treatment for that. So the club foot is basically the newborns that are born with the feet that is twisted feet. That is, it is looking, it is downwards or the sideways. So that will be considered as a club foot. So all of these examples that I've given is basically restorative in nature. That is, the surgeries or the treatment, the plastic surgery would be done so that the normal function of the body, that is normal function of the anatomy, would be normal. So these things, even though the plastic surgery is excluded, if it is restorative, it is for to restore the normal functioning of the body, that is considered as healthcare services. So as we discussed, this hair transplantation to remove the baldness and this nose job. So we would have seen the celebrities going for this nose job, and also that will be not considered under healthcare services. So to sum it up, So healthcare services includes all of this diagnosis and treatment. It includes a patient transportation from the clinical establishment. And third, it includes plastic or cosmetic surgery, except when it is done to restore the normal functioning of the body. So I've given you an example. So if you see this Cadwell Hospital offers the palliative care to patients who are all suffering from the life-threatening disease. So if you see this palliative care is generally it is not focused on curing the disease or illness, rather than it focuses on the quality of life. So is this kind of treatment covered in the healthcare services? And in this case, the patient has requested to provide the services in his residence. So, is this considered as a healthcare services? Yes, it is considered as a healthcare services. Even though the services are provided at home, it is considered as a healthcare service. So here I've listed out the categories and the examples. So to understand it better, so we've already seen this. To just to look it up further, or as a summary basis are given. So diagnosis or treatment, as we have discussed earlier. So it is for the diabetics or blood pressure, and if there is any fracture, if you go to an orthopedic clinic, that is considered as a diagnosis or treatment. And care for deformity, abnormality, or pregnancy, that we've seen. Pregnancy system of medicines, everything, Ayurvedic, Unani, everything is included. Patient transportation services, that is by means of an ambulance, you carry the patient. Excluded, so cosmetic products is excluded. And medically required surgeries are exception to exclusion, so that it is included in the healthcare services. One more thing is we would have heard about this Reiki healing. So is this Reiki healing a part of healthcare services? No, definitely it is not, because you must be aware of this healing, because it is not scientifically proven medical treatment. So it involves relieving the stress or pressure. So it is generally not considered a healthcare services, and it is also not exempted from the healthcare service. So in the exemption notification, we have seen what is healthcare services. That is the service that are provided by the healthcare professional, whether it will be considered as a healthcare service or not. So that we have seen. So to consider it for exemption, we should check whether it is provided by a clinical establishment. So the definition of clinical establishment is also provided in the notification 12/2017. So what it is tell, it is simple. So it tells that clinical establishment is nothing but a hospital, a nursing home, or a clinic that provides the general treatment, all of this diagnosis, and care for the injury or illnesses in the recognized system of medicine. And it also includes the independent entities or units within the clinical establishment. That is, say you have diagnosis center or pathology labs, that is also considered as a clinical establishment. So this is a clinical establishment. So the healthcare services has to be provided by the clinical establishment, and it can be provided by the authorized medical practitioner as well. So here I've given the example for clinical establishment. Suppose say there is a multi-specialty hospital, City Care. So it is providing services relating to diagnosis, emergency surgeries, pre and post operative care, maternity and child care, pathology labs, all of this, and it is recognized system of medicine is allopathy. So this is specifically considered as a clinical establishment because it satisfies all of the definition of the clinical establishment. So let us look into this case where the services, healthcare services provided by the company is not considered as a clinical establishment. So this is an advanced ruling case in case of Haryana, Mrs. ARPK Health Care. So there is an hospital named Mrs. Asian Hospital, and it provides healthcare services to its patient. But this Asian hospital takes the services from ARPK health providers. So the payment to the ARPK is provided by Asian hospital. So whether the transaction between the Asian hospital and the ARPK healthcare is considered as a clinical establishment, because Asian hospitals only provide the services to the patient, but the services provided by ARPK to the Asian hospital is not considered a service provided to the patient. So it is merely a business to business transaction. So it is basically B2B transaction between a business and a business, and so it is not registered, and so it is covered under taxable supply. And one of the most important thing in this, the health providers ARPK is not registered as a clinical establishment under the Clinical Establishment Act. So it is merely a company. It is not registered under the Clinical Establishment Act. So as it is not a clinical establishment, so it won't fit into the definition of healthcare services, and the payment by the Asian hospital to the ARPK healthcare service provider will be considered as a B2B supply, and it will be taxable. So it is not covered under the exemption notification 12/2017. The next part of the entry number 74 is authorized medical practitioner. So who is an authorized medical practitioner? An authorized medical practitioner is a person who is registered with Council of Recognized System of Medicines established or recognized by law in India, and it also includes a medical professional having a requisite qualification to practice. That is, an authorized medical practitioner or nothing but a medical practitioner, and he must be registered within the uh, council registered by the law in India, and he must having a requisite qualification to do the medical practitioner. Say for an example, Dr. Anjali Verma is an MBBS doctor, and she is registered in the Medical Council of India. She practices a general medicine at Mumbai. She is obviously considered as a medical practitioner, and she is practicing in allopathy. So that is also considered as a better term, then that is also considered as a medical practitioner. Similarly, if a doctor is providing Ayurvedic treatment, and he will also be considered as an authorized medical practitioner. So the next part in entry number 74 would be services by paramedics. So who are these paramedics? The paramedics are not defined in the GST law. So generally it is understood as, and in the general parlance, paramedics are nothing but the trained healthcare professionals. That is the persons we see as nurses, physiotherapists, lab technicians and assistants in the hospitals. These people are paramedics, and the services provided by them are also considered as a healthcare services, and it is exempt. Suppose, say, if these paramedics are employed by the clinical establishment, and the services they provided are considered under an employee-employee relationship, and it was also covered under healthcare services. Say if the paramedics is working independently, not in any clinical establishment, in that is in an individual capacity, whether this service provided by the paramedics independently will be considered as a healthcare services. Yes, it will be considered as a healthcare services. So in case of paramedics, even if there is an employee-employee relationship or it is not there, both the situations, it is covered under healthcare services, and it is exempt. So till now, we have seen the entry number 74 point A, where it talks about the healthcare services provided by the clinical establishments, authorized medical practitioner, and paramedics. It is exempted, but with effect from 18 July 2022, there was an amendment in this entry number 74. So it tells it brings it is the insertion of a provision in the notification 12/2017, and an insertion of a line item in the notification 11/2017, that is the rate notification. So we must be aware that a rate notification for services is 11/2017. So whenever there is an insertion in the insertion of entry number in 11/2017, that becomes taxable. So what are the change that they have made? We'll see. So this is the insertion of proviso in entry number 74. So till now we have seen this entry number 74 in notification 12/2017. So below that entry number 74, a proviso is included. So what does it proviso tells? It tells provided that nothing contained in this entry shall apply to the service having room charges exceeding rupees 5,000 per day to a person receiving health care. So it tells, so in the exemption notification, we have a proviso. So it tells that room charges exceeding 5,000. So suppose if there is a patient admitted in the hospital and he is paying room charges, and if it exceeds 5,000 per day, it is not exempt. And in that also, they have provided exemption. That is, if a patient is admitted in an ICU, that is critical care unit, ICCU, CU, or NICU, for him, this proviso is not applicable. So, which means to say, if a patient is admitted in the hospital in an ICU, even though the rent charges exceeds rupees 5,000 per day, that is still considered as an exempt, and it is not taxable. So what they've made is they've inserted a proviso in this notification 12/2017 telling the room charges exceeding 5,000 is not exempt. So if it is not exempt, obviously we have to see at what date it is taxable. For that, they have inserted this entry number 31A in the rate notification, that is 11/2017. So this entry number 31A talks about services provided by a clinical establishment by way of providing room rent having charges exceeding rupees 5,000 per day. So it's the same thing. It is being inserted by means of entry number 31E notification 11/2017, and the rate is 5%. So whenever the room charge exceeds 5,000 per day, it is no more exempted and it is taxable at the rate of 5%. So this was the change that was made with effect from 2022 18 July. So this is for 74, a proviso is inserted. So we have seen the other aspects in the healthcare as well. So we'll discuss that. So this is to sum it up, the service provider and the service recipient. So the service provider is a clinical establishment which is defined, authorized medical practitioner which is defined. Paramedics, it is not defined, but it is generally the nurses and lab technicians. And the service recipient can be any person. And the service provider is healthcare services other than room charges. So with all of this, it is exempt, except for the room charges exceeding 5,000 per day. That is taxable. So on this entry number 74, we've seen point A. B talks about services provided by means of transportation of patient. So the service provider, so in this, the service provider can be any person and the service recipient is any person, and the service provided is transportation of a patient in an ambulance other than specified above. So if you read this entry number 74B, is it similar to the definition of healthcare service? So if we see there, so in this healthcare services, we saw what is included. That is the patient transportation to or from the clinical establishment that is already covered under the healthcare services. But now there is a 74B which talks about patient transportation of a patient by means of an ambulance. So what is the difference between this and that? So in this, the healthcare services, it includes a patient transportation, talks about the service provided by the clinical establishment, authorized medical practitioner, and paramedics. If it is provided by these persons, that will be covered in the healthcare services and it's exempt. But this entry number 74B, this entry number 74B specifically talks about transportation of patient in an ambulance, and the service provider can be any person and the service recipient can be any person. So here the service provider need not be a clinical establishment or an authorized medical practitioner or a paramedics. It can be any person. So if so you and me, if we are providing ambulance services, and that will be covered under entry 74B and it is exempt. So yeah, we could take the example of COVID-19, where a large number of people are providing, they're providing ambulance services. So that will be covered here, and that is exempted by means of entry 74B. So as we have seen earlier, this service by way of treatment of disposal of biomedical waste or incidental thereto was covered under exemption notification. So this was also made taxable by means of the same notification 3/2022. and it is omitted by means of notification 4/2022. So it tells the service provider is a common biomedical waste treatment facility, and the service recipient is a clinical establishment. All of this disposal of biomedical waste is no more exempted. It is taxable, and it is taxable at the rate of 12%, and it is included in the notification rate notification 11/2017. So, what is biomedical waste? Biomedical waste is material, any kind of material that contains infectious material. So, it can be your cotton swabs or used bandages, something like that. So, all of this medical waste are considered as biomedical waste. So, the service, if the service recipient is the clinical establishment, it is no more exempt, and it has become taxable. In the same way, the services provided by the cord blood banks to any of the person, that is the services of preservation of stem cells or any other services in relation to such preservation, that is also omitted in the from the exemption notification 12/2017, and so it has become taxable, and it is taxable with rate of 80%. In the start of webinar, we've seen 4 services which were exempt. In that, out of 4, 2 was made taxable, and in case of healthcare services, a proviso was inserted. But only this entry number 46, which was still retained, that is services provided by a veterinary clinic to any person, that is healthcare of animals or birds. So it is still exempt, and it is not taxable. It is covered in the exemption notification 12/2017. So there is another entry, that was an insertion of another entry in notification 12/2017, that is 74A, with effect from 1/1/2019. So what is it tells is service provider is a rehabilitation center, that is rehabilitation professionals who are recognized in the Rehabilitation Council of India, and the service recipient are medical establishment, education institutions, rehabilitation centers, or an entity is under 12AA. So this services provided by means of rehabilitation council or therapy and any such other activity is covered by means of this exemption notification 12/2017, and it is exempted. So till now we have seen this exemption notification and what is mean the healthcare services and what is all covered under that. And if it is the services provided by the healthcare professional is taxable or exempted. So once that is found, we'll have to determine the place of supply to see how it is taxable. So because in GST, we have CGST, SST, and IGST. So to determine the place of supply, we'll have to look into the IGST Act Section 12, subsection 4. So the place of supply generally for the healthcare services is the location where the services are actually performed. So usually the location is the hospital. So you go to hospital and there you get treated or there you get diagnosed. So that location, that is with location where the services are performed, is generally considered as a place of supply. But suppose what is a place of supply in case of online consultation? Because post COVID, we could see a large growth increase in the online consultation. So if there is an online consultation, the doctor will be in a laptop and I'll be in a laptop. So how do you determine this place of service? You cannot tell where the services are actually performed, because it is in this laptop half and then laptop half. You cannot tell that. So the general rule for the place of supply will apply for this. So the general rule under section 12, subsection 2 will apply. That is the location of the recipient. So in case of online consultation, the general rule, the location of recipient will be the place of supply. So say for an example, Mr. A, who is residing in Coimbatore, is having some of the skin allergies, and he badly wanted to consult a dermatologist. So what he does is he goes he Google searches and he finds out an online health consultation named Practo. So Practo is generally having head office in Karnataka. So he gets an appointment from Practo and he consults. The doctor who's providing the consultation is actually a doctor based out of Kerala. So in this situation, what will be the place of service, place of supply? Because will you say the location of the recipient, that is A in Coimbatore, or will you say the head office of the online health consultation platform, that is Karnataka, or the doctor, that is service provider, that is doctor. So in this case, online consultation will be the place of supply will be the location of the recipient, that is Tamil Nadu. So this is with respect to place of supply. Going on to the next most important part, that is registration. So when it comes to registration, you must be aware the fiscal limits for registration. So when we'll have to look into the aggregate turnover. So for services, when it exceeds 20 lakhs, we'll have to get registered in the GST. And for goods, only we are dealing in goods, the turnover, aggregate turnover, if it is exceeding 40 lakhs, then that has to be, we'll have to get registered with GST. So the aggregate, we have to look into the definition of aggregate turnover to determine are we actually liable to get registered under GST. So the aggregate turnover is nothing but the aggregate value of all of the supplies that we provide. So the definition specifically goes on to tell that it includes the aggregate value of all the taxable supplies, of all the exempt supplies, and the export of goods and services, and the interstate supplies under the same pan. So it specifically tells that exempt supplies are also included in the definition of aggregate turnover. Okay, so we are seeing healthcare services, right? So if a doctor is providing consultation services, that is fully exempt. So his turnover is exceeding the prescribed limit. Is he required to get registered under GST? Because that is only exempt. If he's required to get registered under GST, because exempt supply is also included the aggregate turnover. Yeah, so aggregate turnover, as it includes exempt supplies, we think that he has to be registered under GST, but no. Then that is where the section 23 comes into play. So it specifically provides exemption for persons exclusively engaged in the exempted services. So if the doctor is providing only exempted services, that is, he is only dealing with exempted supply, he is not required to get registered under GST. So, for an example, generally in the common parlance, the doctors provide healthcare services. Generally, if you go for any doctor's clinic, he provides a consultation services, he does the surgery, he does the treatment. All of this are exempt from GST. So, if you have a headache or if you have fever, you go to a doctor and he prescribes some medicine and he suggests the local pharmacy where we go and get medicines. So, in this case, the doctor is providing only the exempted services and he is not required to get registered under GST. But the pharmacy has to get registered under GST because the medicines are taxable. Suppose if the doctor is also involved in selling of medicines and medical equipments, or he's providing this taxable services, as we've seen earlier, this cosmetic surgery and all, that is taxable services. So if a doctor is not only providing the consultation but is also involved in this taxable services, then he has to get registered himself under the GST. If the healthcare service professionals are only providing the exempted services, then he is not required to get registered under GST, to put it simple. So here I've listed out the general service type that are generally provided by the healthcare professionals and its GST applicability. So if we see from the hospital perspective, we have inpatient and outpatient services. Generally, for an outpatient, all of this medical consultancy and the treatment without admission, that is exempt. But all of this medicines that he gets from the pharmacy and all, that will be taxable. For an inpatient, almost everything is exempt because the service that he receives from the hospital will be considered as a composite supply of medicine, and in that principal supply will be the supply of healthcare service, and that's why that will be fully exempt. In this, the person whosoever is accompanying the patient, that is the attender, if we get food or medicines to them that is separately supplied to them as an optional services, that will be taxable. So the services provided to the inpatient, everything is considered as a composite supply, and all of it is exempt. Yes, is renting of hospital premises. Generally, rent on leased premises is taxable. That is, you rent out for medical shops and pathology labs. That is taxable. And specifically and most importantly, if the landlord is unregistered, RCM is applicable by is applicable for the hospitals, and they have to remit GST under RCM. This waste treatment facility, we have seen it already, so it has become taxable with effect from 8/7/2022. Medical test services, it is exempt, and medical counseling services, it is generally, if it is generally for cure purpose, it is exempt. If it is for care purpose, it is taxable. And cord blood bank, we've seen already, that is with effect from 18/7/22, it is taxable. Beauty treatment, we all know it very well, it is taxable. Supply of food with healthcare, if it is part of the healthcare service and it is considered as a composite supply, it is exempt, else it is taxable. Veterinary doctor, always it is exempt. The healthcare services that is provided for animals and birds. And ambulance, it is exempt. So let's look into detail about the key scenarios where GST Council has provided a clarification by means of circular. So the Council has provided us a circular 32/6/2018, where the very key scenarios are discussed under GST applicability. So the first is the consultancy charges that is paid to the doctors or technicians. So generally, if you see in multi-specialty hospitals, the hospitals hire senior doctors or technicians. So that comes under employee-employee relationship. The patients directly pay to the hospitals, and the hospitals pay to the senior doctors. So in this scenario, whether the payment that is provided by the hospitals to the senior doctors, is it considered healthcare services, is it exempt? Yes, it is exempt. That is clarified by means of the circular. It is covered under healthcare services by means of exemption notification 12/2017. So the consultancy charges that is paid to doctors are also healthcare services, and it is also exempt by means of exempt notification. Next is the retention money that is retained by the hospitals. Suppose if a patient comes to the hospital and the hospital charges him rupees 10,000. In that, only 7,500 is paid to the that is senior doctor, and the balance 2,500 is retained by them for all of the care that they are providing, all of the infrastructure, all of the nursing that they provide. For that, everything the free time is 2,500. Whether this 2,500 is taxable or it is covered under exemption notification. So this is also clarified by the circular that the retention money is also considered as a healthcare. It is a part of healthcare service, and it is exempt and it is not taxable. Again, this food supplied to patient we've seen earlier. So in case of an inpatient, what are the food is supplied to them? What by means of the advice of a doctor or nutrition, that is considered as a composite supply of healthcare, and that is exempted. And if it is for others, that is you have attendees, you have visitors, for all of them, that will be taxable supply, and it is not exempted. In case of food supply, if the hospital is having an in-house canteen, in that case, the ITC will not be available to the hospitals, including the capital goods and the inputs. So if they have an in-house canteens, no ITC can be availed. Else, if it is outsourced from caterer, also they charge GST, but you cannot, from the hospital perspective, ITC is cannot be availed. And the food that is supplied to the doctors or staff, even though it is free, that will attract GST. There is another circular that is provided as a clarification. If we see the exemption notification in the GST, that is 12/2017, it is basically derived out of the service tax exemption notification, that is 25/2012. So substantially it is continued. So going on that line, for the ambulance services, so generally the ambulance services, it is exempt. But in some scenarios, there are private service providers, that is, these PSPs provide services to the state government, which in turn provide services to the patient. So obviously, if the PSPs are directly providing to a patient, that is exempted by means of 74 12 notification by 12/2017. And the government providing services to the patient is also covered under that. What is the plight of PSPs providing services to the state government, who in turn provide services to the patient? That is also exempted by means of this exemption notification 12/2017, and it is covered under entry number 3 and 3. Only if it is pure service, it is covered under serial number 3. If it is a composite supply, where the value of goods is less than 25% of the total supply, that will be covered under serial number 3. So, to put it simple, the ambulance services are exempt on a GST, even if it is provided directly to the patient or to the government under National Health Mission. Everything is exempt under notification 12/2017. So here I've given this summary how it was before GST and after GST. So serial number 2 is retained as serial number 74 in GST, and 25A is retained as serial number 3 and 3A. There is also another circular, circular 177/9/2022. So it specifically tells that the IVF procedures are also considered as healthcare services and it's exempt. So IVF is nothing but the treatment through assisted reproductive technology for the infertility. So the IVF is also considered as a healthcare service and it is exempt. So if we look into the training purposes, so if we see this nurses and for the technicians and all, the training services will be provided. Is that exempt or not? So we have a particular case law from, ruling from Karnataka, Spanda Rehabilitation Research Center. So in this case, the hospital is providing a practical training to the nursing students and the psychologists from the recognized institutions. So here the training involves the patient interaction and issuing certificates as well, but it is not considered as a healthcare services and GST section. This was given by means of advanced schooling. So the fees collected from the nurses for imparting the practical training is not exempt. It's not covered in the healthcare services and it is not exempt. And this SUV is nothing but substance disorder, substance use disorder. So generally it tells that an inability to control the use of a substance like alcohol or drugs. Whether the treatment provided for this SUD is considered as a healthcare service. So the ruling of Rajasthan in case of Sanjeevani psychiatric clinic tells that it is not healthcare services because it is typically not covered under healthcare services and it is not exempted by means of notification 12/2017. So this COVID-19 vaccine, we must be very much aware. So is the supply of this COVID vaccine is a taxable supply or it is accepted by means of notification? So this Appellate for Advanced Ruling Authority in Andhra Pradesh has given out a ruling classifying it as supply of goods rather than healthcare services. So this supply of vaccine is only, it's only a supply of goods rather than any diagnosis or treatment. So the vaccine for the COVID-19 is considered as a taxable supply of goods and it is not exempted by means of healthcare service. So these are the aspects of healthcare services to put it in detail and circle. So if you have any queries regarding this, you can put it up in the chat box and we'll be ready to answer. Okay, so we have questions. So there is a question by Ms. Vashini. So she's asked, what if ARPK is registered under clinical establishment? Will this change the taxability nature? So this is the case work that we have seen for this clinical establishment. So the query is that the ARPK was not registered under clinical establishment, and so it was not considered as a healthcare service. What if it is registered as a clinical establishment? If it is registered as a clinical establishment, that will be considered as a healthcare service, and it is and that will be exempt only. There is a question from Pavitra. If room rent exceeds 5,000, only the room rent is taxable or the entire service amount is taxable? No. In the healthcare services, by means of a proviso, what was included was only the room rent. That is, room rent exceeding rupees 5,000 per day is only taxable. So only the room rent is taxable. Other than the room rent, the diagnosis and treatment that you get from the hospital is exempt only. That will not be taxable. Only the room rent is taxable, and that if it is exceeding only rupees 5,000. There is another question. Place of supply. Sometimes doctor visit the patient's home. Hope it is location of the recipient being the location of the supply. So, as we've seen, the place of supply for healthcare services generally where the service provider. So, if the services is what I've said is generally the services, the treatment are provided in the hospital. So, and so hospitals will be considered as a place of supply. If it is provided in the home and where the recipient, I mean, where the services are provided, that will be considered as a place of supply. But you have mentioned the location of the recipient. Location of the recipient can you please, we'll be sharing the presentation, sir. Post the webinar, we'll be sharing the presentation. So what about medicine sales? Sale of medicines is taxable, sir. We have specific rate for each of the medicines. So I've not taken up that because it goes on the list. We have separate rates for each of the medicines. So generally, sale of medicines is taxable. So that will be coming under pharma sector. There is a question by Balaji. Our client is a private limited company giving diagnostic services like blood test and all in different states. Will that be exempt? So even if it is a private limited company, first thing is it has to get registered as a clinical establishment, and the treatment of diagnosis will be exempt. But if it is by means of cord blood grants with effect from 2022 July, that becomes taxable. So there is a question by Nadia in online consultation. If the medicines are provided by doctor, then whether GST is applicable? Yes, GST will be applicable because you're not an inpatient. So this is obviously will be considered as an outpatient service, OPD service. And if the medicines are provided by the doctor, and you go to a pharmacy and get the product, and in that case, GST is applicable. So Balaji has asked another question. I guess it is a follow-up question. What if the testing services are outsourced to another diagnostic center? So even if it is outsourced, if it deals only with diagnosis, that will be considered as healthcare services. But we have to make sure that it is both covered in the clinical establishment, as we have seen in the same way as we have seen in the case laws. So yeah, I think we are. I think we can wind up. So due to the positive time, we'll be taking up the questions through mail. So if you have any queries, please do mail us, or you can ping us in WhatsApp as well. We'll be ready to answer. So thank you everyone for all of this patience and feedback that you give us always. So please provide the valuable feedback on all of the webinars, and we'll be happy to do it in the future webinars. Thank you everyone. Thank you.